Good morning, my name is Serena Irani, and today we'll be discussing xenophobia and ethnic identity. First, we have Kate with the historical perspective, Patty with the political perspective, Sophia with the ethical perspective, and I will be doing cultural perspective.
In I think the volume will bring by Chris Brew, PhD in journalism. He discusses the differences between monolinguals and bilinguals. And from the Science of Genius by Dean K. Simpson, PhD in psychology, he spoke about Albert Einstein in high regards. And all this talk about immigrants led us to question the differences in treatment between minorities and non-minorities, our Atlantic people. And this led us to our question, to what extent does xenophobia impact ethnic identity?
Xenophobia has discouraged immigrants from connecting with their ethnic identities throughout the past.
Unwelcoming policies are targeting minorities.
Ethically, xenophobia causes minorities to face unnecessary trauma.
Culturally, xenophobia dissuades minorities from expressing their ethnic identity. This led us to our team's solution that minorities need increased representation in politics. Karen Bird, who has a PhD in political science, discusses how in other developed nations, diverse populations are represented in politics and how America needs to follow suit. Now, increased representation of minorities in politics gives them a voice in our politics and the power to make actual changes in policies and laws that aren't in their best interests. They should have a say in matters that affect their lives and be made by people who understand their experiences and struggles. A diverse government will also give a fresh perspective and different takes on issues America has been facing for hundreds of years.
During elections, minorities are not usually at the polls voting because they have the fears of the government and what they could do to them, the possibility that they have illegal immigrants in their family, and that there's discrimination based on their language barriers. This leads to more of the same types of politicians getting voted into office, and that doesn't really make changes for the immigrants. According to Susan A. Banducci, with a PhD in political science, once minority representation is achieved, there's more minority participation.
According to Michelangelo Landgrave, who has a PhD in political science, if changes are not made in the people who represent American citizens in Congress, then changes will never be made in our politics. Laws need to be made to protect and reflect the best interests of all Americans.
Our alternative solution is to have DACA reinstated, says Lindsay Perez, PhD in social sciences and comparative education. This would allow for the residents of illegal immigrant children who had no say in their arrival to the United States. A downside to the policy would be an increase in illegal immigration, says George Ryden and Cristina Martinez, PhD in education.
Job discrimination has limited immigrants' ability to get jobs throughout history. Starting with the Irish potato famine, they got the unwanted and dangerous jobs. And also now, then there was the Chinese who were targeted by the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, and they were thought to be taking away the American jobs, so it's all based on their ethnicity. The government has also contributed to xenophobia and has ostracized immigrants in the past, starting with the Japanese internment camps during World War II. Even Japanese American citizens were sent to these camps. And quota systems have been added in the past, and like, for example, the Chinese Exclusion Act, and Americans felt threatened by the Chinese not conforming to social norms, so they just didn't want them here. There have been the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 has helped prohibit discrimination in the workplace, but there's still bias with the English proficiency, and also the Immigration Act of 1965 have ended all quota acts. But there's still continued illegal immigration because of the Public Exclusion Act that prevents certain races like Latinos from immigrating to the United States today. To solve these issues, we need to help with and improve immigration laws to help with the legalization process, and to help clear up anti-discrimination laws to prevent the loopholes. And in the end, this aids to immigrants to be helping them be more politically active, and so they can be a part of the changes that could affect them and their families. And this is my graph that really sums up all of my research that is just on the flow of immigrants throughout time, through starting with the immigrants, the Irish immigrants with the potato famine, all the way to the Mexican immigrants coming into the United States today.
So the Voting Rights Act of 1965 gave minorities more voting rights, says Michael Jones Correa, PhD in political science. However, voter ID laws still limit the political participation of minorities, says Thomas Stallfield, PhD in political science, and Robert E. Smith, American attorney. And minorities need political representation in order to increase their voting turnout, says Richard Saville, Karen Bird, and Andreas West, all PhDs in political science. And another solution would be to remove strict voter ID laws as they infringe on constitutional rights. Over here you're going to see there has been an increase in ethnic diversity in Congress over the past few years. However, whites still make up the whites have the larger share of Congress in comparison to the U.S. population.
Ethically, it is unjust that the people who cannot relate to the situation of minorities are also the people directly creating the legislation that affects them. According to Spencer Overton, who has a PhD in law, the House of Representatives cannot effectively create policies that benefit all Americans if the people making policy decisions do not look like all of America. This is represented in our chart here, where 38% of the United States population is a minority, while only 17% of people in Congress are a minority, and only 14% of people in state legislators are a minority. This shows the disparities between the actual amount of minorities we have in our U.S. population and the amount of minorities we have in our legislation. For example, the executive orders implemented by President Trump as part of his immigration policy overgeneralize ethnic identity as an indicator of the risk a group of people poses to America. However, America has a diverse group of ethnic identities. Over 4.35 million Muslims live in America. According to the American Immigration Lawyers Association, the directive for new policies may not be supported with evidence and have many negative impacts on minorities, more specifically Muslims. Some of these negative consequences include separated families and reduced enrollment in U.S. colleges by international students. Another example of policies which negatively impact minorities are the immigration raids imposed by ICE. These raids overall lead to trauma which is experienced more specifically by children of immigrants, some of whom are American citizens. Xenophobia is such a large and complex problem, but political representation can't solve all the issues, but representation is important and can trickle down to make a difference in American culture and how people perceive Americans. According to Todd Donovan, PhD in political science, visible political leadership by members of minority groups enhance trust in government, pride, and group participation. Instead, minorities becoming discouraged by harmful policies and lack of representation, increased political representation can empower minorities and positively reinforce their ethnic identities.
Alan Dahmer, who has a PhD in Middle Eastern history, explains how second-generation immigrants are more likely to assimilate into American culture, which erases a part of their ethnic identity. When they live in a white-dominated area, they are more likely to blend in and not attract any attention to themselves and try to consider themselves as typical Americans. However, Marianne Fay says that when immigrants come to a country, they are more likely to migrate to an area where they already have previous family members and previous people from their home nation. And that gives them a sense of like a home away from home and reassures their identity. Alexander Macedon discusses how assimilation into American society with Greek Americans felt so pressured to assimilate that they tried to morph themselves into typical white Americans to try to excel into American society. However, Yvonne Haddad reiterates that by assimilating into American culture, they lose a part of their identity and a part of their culture that can't be retrieved. Minorities feel that when they don't have an identity, they don't have a power or a voice to actually change anything in our politics or our laws. In the graph, you can see that first-generation minorities more likely to consider themselves to have ties to their home country and not as typical Americans. But second generation the numbers nearly doubled, where they consider themselves typical Americans as they were born in the country and born into this nation. Overall, ethnic identity have negative impacts based on xenophobia and can be solved by having increased political representation in our politics.
Okay, your first question goes to Kate. In the future, what change would you make to your group norms, and how would you expect that to improve the team presentation?
In the future, I would like to make sure, I know we had problems with making sure our question was all, like we were all going in the same direction and it wasn't too broad, so I'd like to make sure that we're all going, like making sure we're all staying on topic and that all our ideas connect, so then it'll be easier to make the team solution later in time. And also I want to make sure that we're always like daily researching and talking to each other about our research to make sure we stay on top of all the parts like that we're doing.
Okay, second question goes to Serena. Reflecting on your colleagues' work, which one had the greatest impact on your overall understanding of the problem your group identified?
Kate's perspective from a historical really changed the way that I thought about our solution, because it showed that the problems that we were addressing have really been ingrained into American society for hundreds of years, and it's something that has been so set and sewn into our culture that we don't even realize it, that it made me rethink how our solution needed to be something that could really trickle down and really make an impact in a society that's otherwise pretty much set in its ways.
Next question goes to Hattie. In what way did you improve your ability to work with a group as a result of this project?
So as a result of this project, I was better able to communicate with my group members. I felt like we really had to talk to each other more in order to make sure we were going down the same direction. We had trouble in the beginning, but I feel like towards the end we were able to better go into the direction of political representation and political participation for minorities. So communication was a key component in making this presentation.
And last question goes to Sophia. What is an example of a compelling argument from one of your peers' individual reports that you decided to exclude from your team presentation, and why?
So Hattie specifically came up with our alternate solution, which was reinstating DACA. And the reason that we did not specifically include that as our solution was that we felt that it did not accurately impact all of minorities, which is what we wanted to focus on. It wasn't broad enough and focused more on immigration, and wouldn't necessarily impact help with Serena's perspective or Kate's perspective as much.